Hello, my name is Anke Jesus Banduro, and it is currently the 1st of February 2026, and it's my pleasure to present my first assignment, which discusses about prompt number 3 of the list of options given. I'll be talking about mutual reliance and ethnic hierarchy, and I will try and answer to the best of my abilities the question, how did mutual reliance and ethnic hierarchy coexist and become embedded in Latin American society? Before we move on, the painting at the bottom of this slideshow shows Hernan Cortez and Malintzin talking with the Aztecs, and this painting was created shortly after the early aftermath, as discussed in the Module 3 lecture by Professor Levy. It was created by an unknown Tlaxcalan artist at an unknown time, to my knowledge. First of all, I want to discuss some of the topics we will be discussing in this presentation. We will begin by starting off by giving some background information and clearing up some common misconceptions. We will then pivot into the next topic, which discusses language and strategy, then move on to the topic of infrastructure and economic reliance, and continue by discussing cultural validity and ultimately casta systems. This painting on the left is a portrait of Hernan Cortez, which I don't know who made it or when it was created. Indigenous population and colonizers, some common misconceptions about the colonial or colonized period during the time of Spanish conquest was that La Malinche, Malintzin, betrayed her people when, in fact, that wasn't true. She wasn't Aztec, but a Tlaxcalan princess, as Professor Levy discussed in the Module 3 lecture, and was put into slavery. She was not a friend or part of the Aztecs, but an enemy. So she couldn't be considered a traitor, as again discussed by Professor Levy. Before conquest, the indigenous population were uncivilized and savage people, which is untrue, seeing as the Spanish needed them to colonize the land. They created advanced infrastructure, and Tenochtitlan was built on a lake, which took advanced understanding of infrastructure and how to build it and make it durable. The indigenous population was technologically primitive, which depended on what you're talking about. It really depends what you were talking about when you're talking about uncivilized, because if you're discussing their weaponry and how they didn't have iron or bronze tools or different types of weapons of that sort, and relied on stone and obsidian tools, and yeah, you can make an argument. But if you were talking about the indigenous population's understanding of astrology and the body, then they were not. The Aztecs had a very good understanding of astrology, which ties back to their religion and their calendar systems. And in regards to their understanding of the body, they did a lot of human sacrifices. The painting to the left is an illustration of the one flower ceremony from the 16th century, the Florentine Codex. The two drums are the topenazli in the foreground and the huehuetl in the background. We will now get into our presentation by discussing the aspects of language and strategy and how that played a role into mutual reliance and then ethnic hierarchy. A good example of this and mutual reliance and ethnic hierarchy coexisted was Hernan Cortez and Malintzin. Malintzin was a Tlaxcalan princess, as said by Professor Levy in the lecture, who was sold into slavery and was subject to Aztec rule. And first of all, she had no affiliation with the Aztecs. Second, she was not a friend, but an enemy. She translated for Hernan Cortez and was ultimately the help in Cortez's mission in conquering Latin America. So without La Malinche or Malintzin, Cortez's mission and the mission of the Spanish would have been ruined or not as effective, as shown from previously our Module 3 lecture. Why it wouldn't have been effective was because, one, the Spanish didn't know the land as well as the indigenous population did. Two, and they didn't know the language. They didn't know how their politics and society was and how it was established. And while Malintzin was an important part to Cortez in Latin America, she was still beneath him for one of four reasons. One, she was a woman, which back then women were subservient to the men. Two, being of indigenous descent. And then three, he was Spanish. And number four, she was a gift. So she was not only a woman of indigenous descent under a Spanish man's rule, but she was also a gift given to Cortez by the Aztecs. This shows how mutual reliance occurred and was needed in this case. there was still an ethnic hierarchy that coexisted and was followed. Furthermore, economic and infrastructural reliance also shows how mutual reliance existed further than just Hernan Cortés and Malintzin. Hernan Cortés, in his correspondence in his second letter, he wrote and discussed how, one, he could let, well, general gist was he can let Moctezuma stay in power and control over Tenochtitlan and collect tribute and instruct the people for the Spanish crown. Two, he kept the current infrastructure and market how it was because he saw how valuable or how important it was and how it was compared to some Spanish land. It was not as, or it was better. And number three, he recognized Tenochtitlan already existing defenses of being built on a lake, and how it would be better to control it rather than destroy it. And this is why he ultimately built brigantines to control the area around Tenochtitlan later on, to take control. And he also used political alliance with other indigenous groups to help overtake the Aztecs a little bit later on. This shows how Cortés used mutual alliance with Moctezuma, the Aztec people, and its already existing infrastructure to aid in his plan of conquest for the Spanish crown, while also using the mutual alliance of other indigenous groups to help them take down the Aztecs, with the help of disease also that help minimize their numbers. He also planned from collecting tribute for the Spanish crown, building farms, as shown in the second letter. He also used the existing infrastructure of the city's layouts, markets, and how Tenochtitlan was built on a lake to help him take over, by seeing all the weaknesses and advantages they had. Alongside the language and strategy and infrastructure and the economic reliance, they also used cultural validity to the Spanish advantage. Bartolome de las Casas talked about how the indigenous population were as advanced as the Greeks and Romans and discussed all their good qualities and how they didn't deserve to be slaves. The Spanish crown, the Spanish ultimately in 1942 made the new laws of the Indies, which set the indigenous people free. The new laws, while setting the indigenous people free, also set rules that were set to legitimize Spanish control. They kept it down on the totem pole, which is inaccurate, and made them work in shift. They were kept in a strict social order where they were supposed to stay in their place regardless of them being free. This ultimately shows how the Spanish crown and Spanish in general did let the indigenous people or population free and kept them safe from cruel punishment under law, but they were still beneath the Spanish, showing but another aspect of how ethnic hierarchy existed. Also during this time, the Casa system was used to show the hierarchy of individuals based on how they were born instead of rigid social standard. They set to one, as I said before, set a rigid social hierarchy to keep and maximize Spanish dominance and control. Two is set rights based on social order, which also set taxes based on where you ranked on the list, and on your ancestry. It also said to keep Africans at the bottom while keeping pure bloods on top and keep them in control. The custom system shows how the Spanish, while having mutual alliance with people in the area, also had a social order based on ancestry, where you were born, and to who you were born to. This allowed the Spanish to maintain dominance in Spanish colony and keep people in their place. I would like to end the presentation by saying a quick thank you and showing the portrait of Hernan Cortés I edited with AI giving a thumbs up.